Kia ora koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki te whare i te wahi e mahi e Aotearoa, haere mai ki te whare o te hira nā waka e tamaki makouro e nā mana e nā reo e nā mihi nui ki te tanga whenua o te tamaki makouro ko Hamish McDougall, tako ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this event organised by the Auckland branch of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs. My name is Hamish McDougall. I'm the National Executive Director of the Institute, and I'm pleased to welcome you here today in place of the Auckland branch chair, Professor Ruben Azizian, who we think is currently in Armenia, but he sends his apologies. It's particularly timely and valuable, I think, to hold a discussion about the US presidential election. We're just over a month away from the 5th of November, and it's really clear that this election campaign has been compulsive viewing. I saw a presentation from Richard Fontaine recently, who's a prominent foreign affairs think tanker from Washington, D.C., in which he said, most presidential debates will have 0 to 1 black swan events. These are major cataclysmic, game-changing events. And this campaign has had about 5 or 6, and we could include Donald Trump being convicted of 34 felony charges, the US Supreme Court ruling that Trump has immunity for his presidential actions, Joe Biden having one of the most dreadful presidential debate performances anyone could remember, Joe Biden stepping out of the race and being replaced by Kamala Harris, who's the first African-American woman and citizen of Indian ethnicity to be a presidential candidate. We've also had 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump, one of which very nearly was successful, and the appointment of J.D. Vance as a running mate. And this sort of House of Cards, West Wing script writing has, of course, generated plenty of interest here in New Zealand. But that is not only, I would say, because of the melodrama of it. I was rereading a speech recently by former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, which she gave to the NZIIA conference, in which she claimed that New Zealanders pay more attention to US elections than they do to New Zealand elections. It may be something of an overstatement, but it does very much stand to reason that what is happening in the US, particularly in election time and key swing states, really does affect the entire world, and New Zealand is very much a part of that. And that's especially the case given the current instability and strategic competition we're seeing in international affairs. So with all this in mind, I'm very pleased to introduce a talk by Professor Todd Belt. Professor Belt is the Director of Political Management Program at George Washington University. This is right inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. The local metro stop is Foggy Bottom. He was previously the John W. Kluge Fellow at the Library of Congress and Professor of Political Science at the University of Hawai. He's co-authored 4 books, the last 2 of which look at leadership in the US presidency. Professor Belt will talk for about 20 or so minutes, and then I'm very pleased to say we'll have a Q&A moderated by Sunil Kushal, who's a member of the NZIIA Auckland Branch Committee and is also General Manager of the India-New Zealand Business Council, among many other sort of community and business activities that he's involved in. And then following the Q&A, just to conclude, we'll have a vote of thanks by Francesca Long, who's the Deputy Chair of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs Auckland Branch. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Belt to address you all. Thank you.
Thank you for that nice introduction, Hamish. I appreciate it. I have a short presentation here for you. And let me get out of here. Yep, there we go. Should be okay. Does this little clicker guy work? It is not activated. Okay, I'll have to use this. Okay, just so you have a little idea of who I am and where I come from. You may not have heard of the term political management before. I am a political scientist by trade, and I teach at the Graduate School of Political Management. George Washington University has many different institutes and schools of politics, as you might imagine, being in the nation's capital. And my program is the Graduate School of Political Management. We train people to work in politics. You might call it the Masters of Business Administration of Politics. Instead of just studying politics, these students then go on to have careers working in politics. So if you know anybody who wants to study that, send them my way. So that's a little bit about what I do at GSPM at George Washington. But we're here to talk about the election, and I'm going to start with the House of Representatives. We'll get to the presidency, but I think it's really important that we think about all three branches of government because they are all up for election this time around. And the House of Representatives right now is very, very closely divided. If you've been watching what's going on in the House of Representatives, Speaker Mike Johnson over there is the second speaker during this current Congress. He took over from his predecessor who was ousted by Republicans because they did not like what he was doing about the budget. The current composition is 220 Republicans, 211 Democrats. There are 4 seats that are vacant. They have not been filled by special election. The governors in those states have waited until this election to fill those seats. Those are retirements or people who have passed away in office. The magic number is 218. There's 435 members of Congress. You got to get to 218 to have majority, to get the gavel, to be in control, to be the speaker. And the speaker is an important part in the U.S. In the U.S. political system. And the reason for that is the speaker actually has more power than any one senator because the speaker can hold or introduce pieces of legislation. And that's important because all legislation that funds the government it originates in the House of Representatives. So it is a very, very powerful position. We have over here Hakeem Jeffries. He is the Democratic minority leader right now. He's hoping that they can cobble together a few more seats to give him the gavel and he would become the next speaker. But let's see how this is shaking out for him. The Democrats were pretty optimistic. There have been a number of court cases which have overturned some of the drawing of lines, the redistricting that has been done by certain states. And I can get more into that in the Q&A if you want. But we have this system called gerrymandering in the United States where districts are drawn in a very political way that helps to retain seats for one party or another and actually results in us having very few competitive districts. Of the districts that are competitive right now, we have solid seats that I have up there, 188 to 177. That's about 300, that's more than 350 of the 438 seats. So about 70 are really competitive. Those are in play for this election. So now you're down to about 70. And then we have some that the people rate these seats as being likely going one way or another way based upon polling and what's going on in those areas, although it's sometimes difficult to get polling in these smaller districts than the larger states. I can talk about polling later if you want to hear about that. And there are some toss-ups, 5 Republican and 8 Democratic. So for the Democrats to really get it, they're going to have a tough time because without those toss-ups, the Republicans look like they'll be able to get it. They'll be able to get to that 218. So Democrats need to cut in, they have to get all those toss-ups that the Republicans have and cut into the likely Republican seats. It may not be as difficult as it looks. And there are 2 outstanding factors that I have here that I'll bring up. The first is what we call presidential coattails. When you have a popular candidate that gets a large popular vote, people will vote straight ticket. They will vote for one party all the way down, which means that there may be some new Democrats coming in if Harris is able to generate this enthusiasm from these childless cat lady people that Taylor Swift has soon got into the election, yet you may have heard of. So there's an opportunity there. Plus, some of these likely seats are actually in states like New York, where they have actually, the courts have just recently changed the drawing of the districts, making them more difficult for Republicans to hold on. in a state like New York, which is likely to go Democratic, if there is a large turnout, that could probably help some of those seats be taken. The second thing is the ballot measures. And when I say ballot measures, I'm talking about abortion ballot measures. In 2022, the Republicans did not do nearly as well in the House and Senate as they had hoped that they would. And that was predominantly because a lot of new young voters came out and voted for the first time. These ballot measures have been extremely successful. These are states putting this on the ballot. Should we expand abortion rights? Should we contract abortion rights? Every single time they're on the ballot, the reproductive rights side wins, even in the most Republican of states, like a state like Kansas. Democrats knew this, and so they made sure to put this on as many states as they could. They put it on 10 states, hoping that people would show up for this, to vote on this ballot initiative, and also vote Democratic straight ticket, and that can possibly help. These are the states that have them. There are 10 states that have them. These Nevada and Arizona are swing states for the presidential election. They're also swing states for the Senate, which is I'm going to get to, and they do have a lot of course, members of the House. So, if the election were held today, I might predict that I think the Democrats have a pretty good chance, even though the numbers don't look good. If there's a good large turnout in November, I think the Democrats take the House. And I think it goes the other way in the Senate, and here's why. Here we have Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. We know that the current minority leader will be stepping down, and there are 3 people who are vying to become the majority leader should the Republicans take the Senate. That is John Thune, John Cornyn, and Rick Scott. So nobody knows who it will be yet. Do the Republicans have a pretty good chance to take the Senate? They have an excellent chance to take the Senate, and here's why. Our Senate is not, unlike the House, which everybody has to run for re-election every 2 years. 1/3 of the Senate runs every 2 years, which means you get a different group running for re-election. And so the electoral dynamics change every 2 years. The magic number in the Senate is either 50 or 51, depending upon if you have the presidency. When it is 50-50, the vice president casts the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. That was Kamala Harris from 2021 to 2023. In fact, she set the record for the most tie-breaking votes of any vice president in history because she was able to do that during an evenly divided Congress. So, if the Democrats take the presidency, they need 50. If they don't, if it's a President Trump, they need 51. But here's where it gets difficult for the Democrats. I'm sorry, I thought I had removed that. That was from the previous slide. I thought I took it out before I came here today. My apologies. Ignore that one. That's actually supposed to say the Democrats are going to lose West Virginia. There is a senator named Joe Manchin in West Virginia. He oftentimes votes like a Republican, acts like a Republican in many ways, but caucuses with the Democrats, gives his vote for Democratic leadership. He is leaving the Senate. He's not running for re-election, and West Virginia is an extremely conservative Republican state. They will be electing a Republican to succeed him. So that gets the Democrats down to 50-50. But this term, they have to hold more seats than the Republicans do. They have 23 seats up, whereas the Republicans only have 11. So if they want to get to 51, they have to retain every single one of their seats and cut into those 11. It's going to be hard because they have people in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Montana who are running for re-election. All 3 of those states have voted for Trump. Pennsylvania went for Biden, but it went for Trump in 2016. Both Ohio and Montana went for Trump both in 2016 and 2020. Those states, it's going to be very, very close. So given the constellation of forces, the fact that the Democrats have to defend so many seats in the Senate, it looks to me like the Democrats will lose the Senate. So Republicans have the House, Democrats probably going to take it. Democrats have the Senate, Republicans probably going to take it, which means whoever becomes president probably going to have a lot of trouble dealing with Congress. Even if it was one party controlling either, still trying to hold all those votes together in very close margins is difficult. And if you haven't heard, the Senate has this little strange thing that it does where to move a piece of legislation forward, you have to have 60 votes to stop debate. It's called the cloture vote. It prevents what's called a filibuster. So for all intents and purposes, for legislation, you need 60 votes, not 50 votes. So it's going to be really difficult for whoever's president. Let's talk about who might be president. So, as you may have heard, it is very close, and it has been very close. We use this crazy thing called the Electoral College, which I'll explain it to you how it works in just a moment. You may know already, but so bear with me if I do explain it to everyone. The popular vote is not what matters. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won by nearly 3 million votes in the popular vote, but she lost the election pretty handily to Donald Trump in the Electoral College, but only because Donald Trump won 3 critical states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And each of those states, he won by less than 1% of the total votes cast. A mere 77,700 votes separated Hillary Clinton from the White House in 2016. 2020, the popular vote wasn't even that close. Joe Biden won by close to 7 million votes, but it was even closer in the Electoral College, 43,000 votes across 3 states again. Arizona, Georgia, and again, Wisconsin was one of those states. Again, all of those under 1% of the votes cast in those states. So it's going to be a close one again if this pattern holds, and I expect it to. Let's talk about what the key states are this time around. Right now, I've colored in red. In the United States, we do it backwards from everywhere else in the world, which frustrates me, but we do. The Republicans are red, the Democrats are blue. The Democrats have a lot of states that they sort of have locked in. Close to 226 electoral votes. The Republicans have about 219. Let me talk about electoral votes. The Electoral College system awards electoral votes to each of the states, plus the District of Columbia gets as many as if it were a state, but it's not. It doesn't have representation in Congress with a full voting member, but it still gets a vote in the presidential election. So there are 100 members of the Senate, 435 members of the House, plus 3 for the District of Columbia. If it were a state, that's 538. You need a majority. Half is 269. That's not a majority. If you don't get a majority, the House of Representatives selects the president with each state getting 1 vote. That's a big advantage for Republicans, by the way. Electoral College, almost every single state uses a winner-take-all system. If you get a plurality of the vote in that state, you get all of the electors of that state. So even if you win by 1 vote in the state of California, you will get all 54. California has 2 senators. All states have 2 senators. They have 52 members of the House of Representatives. That's why they get 54. There are 2 states that do it a little bit differently. Those states are Maine and Nebraska. And Nebraska, just last week, was thinking about changing their rules to go to a winner-take-all system. And I'm going to explain why that is absolutely critical in this election. In their proportional system, what they do is you get those 2 votes that represent the senators if you win the overall state. And then for every congressional district, there are 3 congressional districts in Nebraska, there are 2 in Maine. For each of those you win, you get 1 elector. And so in some recent elections, Nebraska has gone 4-1, meaning that 1 electoral vote in 1 place in Nebraska, that place, by the way, is Omaha, Nebraska. It is a city. And yes, just like in most places in the world, people who are a little bit more progressive live in the cities, and the rural areas are more conservative. And that's what explains that. The same thing happens in Maine. Oftentimes, the rural areas of Maine will vote for the Republican, but the state overall will go for the Democrat, and that will usually split 3-1. Maine was considering going to winner-take-all, but they decided not to. After they decided not to, Nebraska decided, well, maybe we can change ours. Why is that one little electoral vote important? By the way, it was actually a Republican in the state legislature. Our Constitution gives the states tremendous amount of authority to decide how they are going to run their elections and how they are going to allocate their electors, by the way. One Republican said, it's too late to do this. This will confuse the voters. We shouldn't do that. It was one senator a state senator in Nebraska that actually stopped this from happening. Here's why it's important. These three states are commonly referred to as the blue wall for Democrats. If you win them, you have a pretty good chance of winning the Electoral College. Given all the blue we have here, if we add on Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, you get to 269. And if you add that one, you get to 270. If that went winner take all for Nebraska, that would mean Kamala Harris was at 269 and would need one of these other states, what we call the Sun Belt states, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, or North Carolina, to get past 270. Who has an advantage in the North? The Democrats. Pennsylvania is pretty close, though, right now. People are saying all roads to the White House go through Pennsylvania. North Carolina, actually, Biden was doing terribly there. But then when Kamala Harris became the nominee, she really crept up there. They're having a problem right now with their gubernatorial candidate that you might have heard some of the information about. All of his campaign staff quit because of some of the things that he posted online. And Democrats are hoping that that will also mean more straight ballot voting, less Republicans turning out to vote in that election, that they might be able to take North Carolina. So Trump needs to get all of these states and maybe Pennsylvania. He's probably not going to get Wisconsin and Michigan. Those are probably out of his reach right now. So the road to 270 right now, if it were held today, no October surprises in the foreseeable future, you have to say Harris has a much better chance of getting to 270 than Donald Trump does. If it were 2 months ago and we were talking about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, all of these states would be pinkish. He was not even close. Joe Biden wasn't. It was very, very, very different. So I have some data. I am one of the directors of the GW Politics poll, and we poll 2,000 people nationwide, and we re-interview the same people 4 times during the election period, so we can see what sort of changes we see in the electorate. As you know, the national numbers don't mean anything because we use the Electoral College. But sometimes we check our national numbers against what other people are doing to try to see if they're getting a similar number, we're getting a similar number, we should be pretty close. We might be getting it right. Remember that Democrats have to sort of run up the score in order to win the Electoral College. They have to do really, really well because of that. The way that the constellation of states works, it generally advantages Republicans. In the recent history, when the popular vote has not matched or has not gone the same way as the Electoral College, it's the Republican who's winning, not the Democrat. The Democrat usually is getting the popular vote, unless they get blown out. Right now, Harris is doing pretty well, but we also know that Donald Trump does not poll well. A lot of people who support Donald Trump do not like to talk to the media, and the media sponsor these polls. Donald Trump has called the media the enemy of the people, and so some of his followers do not like to talk to them. So, still not too bad. Not too bad for Harris on the national numbers. The top issues. The economy. I mean, we had a president who used to remind himself, he said, it's the economy, stupid. That was Bill Clinton. When he said stupid, he was referring to himself. He was trying to remind himself to say that. The economy is always the number one issue in every election in the United States, and it is no different this time. Of course, the economy has many different aspects to it. You have inflation, jobs, economic growth, consumer confidence are all aspects of it. Right now, when we talk to people, what they are focusing on most of all is inflation. Inflation is down. It's not down below 2%, but it's pretty close. But that's not what people care about. People care about the fact that they are paying more. The prices are still high. It is true that most of the wages have kept up with that. But when people get raises, they think it's because they deserve it, not because it's keeping them in a steady state with higher prices. So that's an issue that definitely does. Oh, by the way, when you ask people, irrespective of who they're voting for, which party is better on inflation, they usually say the Republicans. So that's an advantage for Republicans. Now, there are, of course, some subsidiary issues that both sides are going to try to push to do one of three things, which is activate the base, your supporters, make sure they turn up. Try to convince that little segment in the middle that's still undecided. How there can be people that are still undecided at this point is a little bit beyond me, but there are. And depress the turnout of the base of the other side. You don't want them showing up. You want your side to show up, the other side not to, and then try to convince people in the middle. Those are the three ways you do it. The Democrats believe that they have two issues that will help them do those three things. Abortion, as I said before, abortion has been a very popular issue for them. It has been sort of the kryptonite to Superman for the Republicans, and they are talking about it loudly and all the time. And that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. That has been their other aspect of their policy platform. Republicans, Donald Trump's signature issue is immigration, and he is talking about that a lot, and talking about crime. Crime is actually down. Violent crime is down in the United States, but there's a perception that violent crime is prevalent because people are using these cell phones to take pictures of people doing crimes and then posting it, and then it gets recirculated on the news, and people have a perception that there's more crime going on than there actually is. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be concerned, but this is an issue that Republicans believe is a winner for them. You will also notice that there are no foreign policy issues on here. I can explain to you why. It is the fact that generally people don't vote on foreign policy issues or international affairs in the United States, unfortunately, unless the United States is engaged in a war and has boots on the ground. That's usually not how it happens. It's usually a very lower concern. We can talk a little bit about whether or not the Israel-Gaza issue will have an effect, or the Russia-Ukraine situation, but it's pretty minor. That doesn't mean that there aren't international implications of who becomes president and who is controlling the House and Senate, and I'm delighted to talk about that with you as well. Okay, so let's get back to what's going to happen. So here's some of the data from my poll, or our poll, I should say. I'm not the only one who does it. We asked people, who is better on a particular issue, or how much confidence do you have in candidate X to handle issue Y? So when it says right here, Harris economy, that means we're asking them, how much confidence do you have in Kamala Harris handling the economy? That's what that says. And you can see Donald Trump does better than Kamala Harris on the number one issue. On immigration, he's ahead on that. That's his signature issue. That shouldn't be surprising. On crime, the prosecutor is behind the person with the 34 felony convictions. On abortion, no surprise, Kamala Harris is way ahead of him. So you can see that both candidates are really choosing issues that really play to their strength, and it's working for them in a number of different ways. Here's some more data. And this is when we ask people about the personal characteristics. Why do we care about personal characteristics? Because voters do. For most voters in the United States, they will decide who they're going to vote on based upon their party affiliation. Democrats are naturally going to be attracted to the Democrats, Republicans to the Republican. As we go closer to the election, people start sorting themselves out, the smaller group that's still undecided, based upon issues. And then if people are still undecided as we get really close to the election, it's the personal characteristics of the candidates that become the primary guiding force in determining who they're going to vote for. You might remember in 2016, when James Comey reopened the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email scandal, the weekend before the election, when you look at the data, the late-breaking people who decided who to vote for went 2-1 for Trump over Hillary Clinton, because that was an issue of her personal characteristics, not being trustworthy, trying to hide something. And so if something was to happen to shift who people vote for in this last 5 weeks of the election that we have left, it's probably going to be something about the personal characteristics of the candidate. So let's look at what we know about them.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Something instinctively strange about mental soundness and leadership.
Yes. I can
I'm sorry, we can't hear the question over here.
Oh,
I was just making a point that it would suggest that a demented leader is required. Mental soundness is.
The question that we actually ask is, how well does the phrase, has the mental soundness to serve effectively as president, describe Trump or Harris? That's how we ask that question. And so some people will say, very well, somewhat well, not well, or not very well, or not well at all. So these are the people who say very well or somewhat well, that Harris has the mental soundness to serve. And about 47% say Donald Trump. By the way, when this was Joe Biden instead of Kamala Harris, it was down in the 30s, both on physical health and on mental soundness. In terms of leadership, Trump is ahead. In terms of caring about people like you, this is what this one actually says in the longer format, Harris is ahead on that. In terms of honesty, Harris is way ahead on that one. In terms of is moral, Harris is way ahead on that one. Knowledgeable, Harris is slightly ahead of Trump. And is patriotic, it's a wash on that one. They both get equal rankings on that. Okay, so there are some other big players in this election. The candidates raise and spend their own money. They are limited to how much they can raise by the Federal Elections Commission. There is a Supreme Court ruling called the Buckley versus Vallejo ruling from 1976 that says money is speech, and therefore you cannot regulate, because people spend their money on speech. If you restrict campaign spending, you are therefore restricting speech, and we don't want to do that. So people can raise and spend as much money on political speech as they want. They can create what these are called super PACs, political action committees, also sometimes called independent expenditures. The money going into the money that goes directly to the candidates is disclosed. People know who's giving and how much, and it is limited into how much they can give. Into the independent expenditures, it is unlimited and completely unregulated, other than the fact that these super PACs cannot say vote for or against someone, and they cannot be coordinated with the candidate's campaign. Those are the two restrictions on them. But they can raise and spend as much as they want without any disclosure as to who's giving it. So some very important players. There are big ones that support Democrats and big ones that support Republicans. Oftentimes these groups will be created for one election cycle and then go away. Unlike the candidates who have to be there to answer questions about what they're doing, these people can afford to be a bit less forthright about what they're doing and what they're saying. There is a big one that has a lot of money that they still haven't spent, and this is the cryptocurrency super PAC. I don't think it's any coincidence that Donald Trump just the other day launched his own cryptocurrency. I think that he's trying to get some of this help, and they're supporting the Republican senator in Ohio, who's running against an incumbent Democrat, but they're also spending some money supporting some Democrats. So it's going to be interesting to see who they end up supporting. Celebrity endorsements are becoming more important. We have Taylor Swift, Elon Musk, of course, being very important. The unions are also very interesting. The Teamsters, which is a big union, used to endorse Democrats, decided not to endorse a candidate. Some of the union leadership that has been strongly Democratic is breaking away. The rank and file members of the unions are sort of breaking away from the leadership, and more unionized working people are supporting Donald Trump than in the past. And the last thing I can speak a little bit more on is the fact that there is AI-generated user accounts that is spreading disinformation about things that are going on in the United States, or recirculating things that are misinformation. Misinformation is stuff that is just wrong. Disinformation is stuff that is deliberately sent knowing that it's wrong to influence the election. Things like they are eating the dogs and cats in Columbus, Ohio. You may have heard that one going around, right? So there are other things. I can speak more on the bots and the different disinformation if you have interest in that. Another thing I wanted to tell you a little bit about that has been playing a bigger role in the U.S. election is what's called Project 2025. Most people don't really understand exactly what this is. Even Democrats who are talking about it don't understand what it is, but they are using it as sort of a boogeyman to scare people into voting Democratic. It is mostly about appointments to federal office. What the U.S. president does predominantly is appoint people. There are 5,000 federal jobs that are federally appointed by the incoming president. 1,000 of those require Senate confirmation. Donald Trump, when he ran in 2016, didn't think he was going to win and had Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, managing his transition team. The transition team is the group of people who put together the list of people that they want to put into office once you come into office. And this is absolutely critical for things like national security. You want to be able to pass off information from an outgoing administration into an incoming administration. But then he won. Donald Trump won. And he was influenced by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to get rid of Chris Christie. Jared Kushner does not like Chris Christie because Chris Christie put his dad in jail. Chris Christie was a federal prosecutor who convicted Jared Kushner's father. So who became the new head of the transition committee? Jared Kushner, who had no experience in government, absolutely zero, had no idea what he was doing, got rid of all the documentation and names for government agencies provided by the Christie's Commission, and started all over. There were jobs in the federal government that went unfilled for years because Jared did not know what he was doing, was not properly vetting people, and could not get people into the job in time because he just didn't have the contacts in government. You have to be able to recruit people into working into these federal jobs. What Project 2025 is designed is to stop something like this happening again for the, as they say, next Republican president. We know who they're thinking about. They want to make sure that there is a plan in place so that the next administration can hit the ground running. And that's what this is mostly about. It's mostly about staffing the federal government, which doesn't sound particularly interesting, but trying to staff it and trying to change appointees from civil service to political appointees. In the United States, we have been going away from political appointees and more towards civil service positions in the federal government. There's also a plan to make some groups less independent, like the National Institute of Health. I'm sorry for using all this alphabet soup of descriptions of our different agencies in the United States, but Department of Justice, FBI, the Federal Trade Commission, Environmental Protection Administration, United States Department of Agriculture, Housing and Urban Development, Department of the Interior, and State. They want to carve out a lot of these long-term civil service jobs, replace them with political appointees that will be loyal to the administration. And they want to abolish the Department of Education, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Department of Homeland Security. So that's what Project 2025 is, if you've been wondering what is this thing that Democrats keep talking about. Okay, so some recent trends in the United States in terms of our elections and how things are going. There is that tremendous advantage for people who are incumbents in the United States because in the House races and in the Senate races, because there are real significant advantages to being in office. Name recognition, ability to fundraise. Usually members of the House, about 95% win re-election, and in the Senate it's about 90%. So if you're in, it's hard to lose. We also have the primacy of swing states that I showed you. Those 7 swing states, guess what? That's where the campaign's going on, and that's where the promises are being made to people. And so it's uneven campaigning. A lot of states are not going to get that attention from the candidates. And we have an influence of donors, those political action committees I talked about. And we have a two-party system in the United States. We do not have proportional representation. we have first past the post balloting, and we have single member districts. And these things lead to, but don't guarantee, but they lead to a stronger two-party system. And we have fragmented media and gerrymandering. People in the United States cannot agree on what facts are anymore in the United States. And this is leading to even more polarization. We've also had the phenomenon of geographic sorting. People, Democrats moving to more urban areas, and Republicans moving towards more urban, rural areas. So what's going to happen? Probably legislative stalemate. If what I say is true, and I think it is today, we'll see 5 weeks from now. You got one chamber controlled by one party, another controlled by the other. So whoever's president, it's going to be difficult to get legislation passed. Donald Trump says he wants tariffs and extreme tax cuts. Kamala Harris says she wants $25,000 for new homeowners and extra support for people buying groceries and senior citizens. Trying to get these through both chambers controlled by two very different parties who are at war with one another, I don't see that happening very soon. I don't see also any more support for Ukraine, Israel, or Taiwan being able to get through with these different houses being controlled. So lawmaking and appropriating funds is going to be extremely difficult. I also see more politicization of these legislative powers. You saw Joe Biden's Secretary of Homeland Security got impeached by the House of Representatives. There's going to be more and more investigations and more partisanship because they're not going to be able to get any lawmaking done or appropriations passed. They'll just be kicking it down the road. So that is a pretty, one more thing that is concerning me. Both parties are hiring dozens of lawyers because they are expecting a tremendous amount of legal action after this election. Georgia has decided to go to hand count ballots, which will probably take them about a week. If they are the one state that really matters, this could really muddy the waters. There will be a lot of legal challenges. Both parties are getting ready for that. I don't think we will know who is president on the evening of November 5th. I think this is going to get a bit drawn out. I'm worried about violence. We've seen 2 assassination attempts on one of the candidates for president. There was somebody who went to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi's house looking for her and beat up her husband. Somebody also shot Steve Scalise, a high-ranking member of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives. The number of threats made on members of Congress has gone up by a factor of 8 since 2016. And you know what happened in 2016. So this is what I have for you in terms of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions for you if you want to talk about the effects of all this on international affairs, which I know is what brings this group together. I am happy to chat about that as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor. Just with your questions, just make it brief, and if you've got a statement, just hold it till the end. Professor will be here. You can talk to him one-on-one, but the floor is open for questions. Okay, I think I saw the lady at the back first.
Is there any pressure for a reform of the electoral college system? And if so, what's it entail in terms of changing the law, the Constitution?
You've actually asked 2 questions. What does it entail? And that's great because I have the answers to both because they are different. Changing the Electoral College is almost a no-go because it requires a constitutional amendment, which requires 2/3 of the members of the House, 2/3 of the members of the Senate, plus 3/4 of the states to ratify, which means if you have 13 states who think they're advantaged by this system, they can hold that from changing. There is something else going on right now called the Electoral College Compact. Remember I said that the states determine how their electors are assigned. There are a number of states, including California and Hawaii, who've signed on to this compact saying they will award their electors on the basis of not who wins their state, but who wins the national popular vote. Now, this goes into effect when it gets to 270, a number of states that would equal 270 get there. It's not there yet, but some people are thinking, well, this is a way around actually trying to reform the Electoral College system for the purpose of getting to what I think you're after, which is getting it to match the popular vote. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we have the gentleman? Sorry, yes.
The polling before polling day for the last two presidential elections underestimated Trump.
Right.
Do you think that will be true in this election as well?
I think it will. Yeah. The question about the polling underestimating Donald Trump's strength, and I think it's possible. And in 2016, the underestimation, it wasn't as bad as people think, because if you look at what was in the margin of error in the states where the polls have very large margin of error compared to the national polling, Donald Trump brought a new group of people in, a lot of working class voters who were frustrated with the Democratic Party and hadn't voted in the past. When you're doing polling, you're trying to create a sample that is going to match the election day turnout, which you don't know who's going to turn out, right? So there's a bit of guessing that goes into it. It's a lot of art and a little bit of science that goes into creating this sort of estimate. And because he brought in so many of these new voters, 2016 was off in a few states, particularly Wisconsin. In 2018, by the way, they made those adjustments and they got 2018 right, but nobody talks about how they made the adjustments and got things right. But in 2020, by the time that we've had Donald Trump in office for 4 years, and he had been railing against the media, calling it the enemy of the people, guess who runs the polls, right? It's run by private polling firms, but they are hired by the mass media. So this is the Washington Post poll. So you got what was called non-response bias. There were supporters of Donald Trump who did not want to participate, and that's what caused the underestimate. I'll also give you another one. 2022, after Roe v. Wade was overturned with the Dobbs decision, a lot of new young voters came in, and the polls underestimated on the Democratic side the strength. We thought that there was going to be this big, what we called the red wave of Republicans taking over the House. They did take it, but not by nearly as many seats as we had thought, and they actually lost seats in the Senate. So there was an undercount there that actually benefited Democrats because of the abortion issue that time around. It's hard to know what's going to activate people, and as people are getting more and more activated by these new forms of participation or new encouragement to participation, it's difficult to say. So you have two things going on. Donald Trump, maybe underestimate, and we have this abortion issue on the Democratic side, and we've got Taylor Swift telling everybody to register to vote, and we know young voters go 2-1 for Democrats. So it may be very, very close to being on if both cancel out. And I don't know yet because we don't know who's going to show up.
Sorry. Okay. I think the gentleman in the red, and then I'll come to you. And then
can you comment a bit on the policy regarding legal immigration that both the candidates have? I know this talk about illegal immigration, but what about the legal immigrants who want to do it the right way, do all the paperwork and get there?
Yeah, the legal immigration question. We know about the illegal immigration. Both sides want to crack down on it because people are very afraid of illegal immigration in the United States. It's been a big issue for Donald Trump. On legal immigration, it looks like presidents have done just about as much as they possibly can with the executive powers they have. What's going to have to happen next is going to have to come out of Congress. And here's where we get to that problem of the different chambers very, very closely divided. Every time we've seen immigration go into Congress, it usually stalls. This time it was because of Donald Trump decided he didn't want to have, that one dealt with legal and illegal immigration in the same bill. And usually you have to do that to get both sides to get enough votes together. For a strictly legal immigration bill, I don't see it going through, even if it was paired with illegal immigration. So I think we're going to see status quo probably for the next at least 2 years, unless there's a big shift in the midterm election, maybe 4. Yeah.
Sure, sir.
Democracy as we know it, and bearing in mind how the U.S. president is elected in the system that is used, and also the January 6th insurrection, is democracy. as we know it, under threat?
Well,
Sorry,
absolutely.
I'll just repeat it. The question in a nutshell is democracy under threat?
Democracy is absolutely under threat. You saw that chart I showed of the number of threats that have been made to members of Congress who were duly elected. What happened on January 6th? We had people outside saying, hang Mike Pence. And they wanted to stop what they thought was the steal and the legitimate transfer of power in the United States. I think democracy is under threat. I think, the question is democracy going to win? And making sure that we can re-strengthen these institutions where trust in the institutions of democratic governance has really taken a hit in the past few years. So yeah, it's under threat for sure.
Sure, we had someone east.
When you say the Republican Party going in the Trump loses, do you think that renominating again in 2028?
Interestingly, he just said he doesn't want to run again in 2028. Maybe it's because he is the oldest candidate ever to run for president at this point. He's taken that over from Joe Biden. He doesn't like to announce that, but I don't know why he said that, because it doesn't make any sort of political sense to take yourself out of the conversation. To say he's not going to run again. He says he wouldn't run again, so you have to think that they would nominate someone else. And there are a number of people waiting in the wings, as we saw earlier on, like Ron DeSantis and others.
Do you think ideologically it follows the same sort of Trump playbook? What do you think Trump without Trump is doomed to fail?
We've seen people try to be like Trump. Ron DeSantis tried to be like Trump plus, right? And it didn't work for him because he's not Trump. Trump has his name, Trump has his brand, Trump has his way of doing things. When people try to emulate Trump, oftentimes they fail. But if they do it in their own way, like a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Lauren Boebert or a Matt Gaetz, then sometimes they have success. Maybe not yet on the national scale, but there's something Trump did to the Republican Party that I think has changed it forever. I don't think they're going back to people like George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan anytime soon.
Sure, yes.
Voters on the left in the US, who vote for Democrats, aren't happy with the policy on Israel.
Right.
And
Thank you.
some of those voters said that they're not going to vote, or that they're finding it hard to vote for Kamala Harris because of this. Do you think this is an influential part of the election, or is the group just something that?
Yeah. Did you want to repeat that, or you want me to?
If you can.
Okay, yeah. The question is about the Israel-Gaza issue, and will this affect Democratic candidates, particularly Kamala Harris? Did I get that right? Yeah. Kamala Harris is the beneficiary of not being Joe Biden, right, in this regard, and not being necessarily connected to his plan because she was not the commander-in-chief during his time in office. She knows that there is a vocal minority in the Democratic Party of young people who she needs to win. Joe Biden won the presidency by winning the group of 18 to 29-year-old voters. That was the only group where he won outright. Every other age group he either tied or lost. Young voters are absolutely critical. There are a lot of people who are very concerned about this issue who voted uncommitted in the primary. Yeah, in Michigan and in some other states, they voted in enough numbers that was bigger than the margin that Joe Biden won the state by in 2020 to try to show their electoral strength in the primary, to show that they were not happy with him. The Democratic Party is divided on this issue. Kamala Harris has tried to have it both ways in how she has talked about the issue. She has said, we support Israel, we continue to support Israel, but Israel has gone too far, and so she's trying to be inoffensive and not give anybody a reason to vote against her. I think it's more likely that for some of the people for whom this is the defining issue will either hold their nose and vote Democratic because the other side is worse, or will just not show up. And so that's not as bad as voting for the other person. But will it be enough to cost her a state or two? We'll have to see.
Okay, sure, sorry.
Yes, I
Can you speak a little bit louder, please? No.
Yes, so I'm Mohammed. I'm a Ph.D. student in defense studies at Massey University. My question is what do you think in case of the election, the relationship with China, in case Trump gets elected? So how will it impact the tariffs and taxes and the trade war between China and
Right. Yeah. The question was about the trade war with China if Donald Trump is reelected. I don't know how much more Donald Trump is going to be able to do, but he has promised a lot of tariffs, and he still doesn't seem to understand how tariffs actually work and who pays for them. But I think that he would continue to be hostile to China. I also think that Harris would continue to be somewhat hostile to China. One of the things we found in our GW Politics poll is when we ask people, do you think China is mostly a threat or mostly an opportunity? It's 67% of the people say mostly a threat. So in the United States, there's not an electoral penalty for going hard against China. So I think whoever it is, Trump was always say, well, Joe Biden didn't get rid of the tariffs, but there's the first rule of diplomacy. If somebody has something you want, you don't give it away for free. You extract a concession for it. And Biden hasn't really entered into those negotiations with China, so that card is still on the table to be played by a potential Harris administration to extract some concessions for removing those tariffs. But again, there's no real electoral incentive to be moving on this issue right now. So probably status quo with Harris, maybe a bit worse with Trump.
I think, sorry, here, keep going.
Ask you to reflect on Trump has appointed or given J.D. Vance the vice presidency. I read an article, I think it was in the New York Times or Washington Post the other day, which said that this was really a positioning of him, Vance, to take over the general approach that Trump has actually engendered over the last 8 years, really.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you see that sitting alongside Cheney's, Cheney's remarks the other day, when she's starting to say it's time to think about the establishment of another party, given how far Trump has gone in his populist election?
Right. First of all,
sorry, did everyone hear that question?
No.
Okay, so basically, the question in a nutshell is that is Trump prepping up J.D. Vance to be taking over, and is there a possibility of another party?
Yeah. J.D. Vance certainly thinks he is a little Trump, right? And he dresses just like him, right? And acts like him. But it's not working for him quite as well, right? And we're seeing his popularity slide. Some people will say only Trump can be Trump, but can he be Trump-ish, right? In sort of a sense. It doesn't come off. I mean, people like authenticity, right? And when you're inauthentic in politics, people know. And it is coming off as inauthentic for him. Is he being groomed to be president or to be the next leader? Every vice president is. And vice presidents carry with them not the only ability to step in for a president who might have to leave office. By the way, 1 in 4 do. 1 in 4 have to leave. But also, by running with the president a general election campaign, you also have all the benefits, the contacts, the endorsements, the campaign funding mechanism, and the volunteers to be able to continue that as a successful candidate. So he enjoys all of those benefits. The second part of the question was about Liz Cheney. If she wanted a third party, why didn't she do it already? Why'd she wait until now? She said that her number one mission was to make sure Donald Trump didn't become president. Well, she's had a couple years to do this, and she hasn't. And I don't know why she thinks now, we need a third party. It's a little late in the game now for that.
Well, it's not for now. It's
in the future. In the future, to try to take over the Republican Party. Obviously, she and her father endorsed Harris, and I don't know that is necessarily how you get it done. As I mentioned, we have a system that fosters a two-party system. the Electoral College comes out of that first past the post system. It makes it extremely difficult, not impossible. We've had third-party candidates who have won electoral votes in the past, but it's really hard to win a state as a third-party candidate. The way that, and it's also difficult to even say that a third party has been a spoiler in any election, because a lot of people who vote third party would not vote third party if that third party wasn't there. So you can't just put them into the other column. It doesn't quite work like that. What third parties have done in the United States is they've brought up issues and illustrated to the two major parties there is an electoral constituency here that you can use to gain more people, and that's usually how it works. This would be more the establishment of a third party to try to break people off the Republican Party and reestablish it. We have had parties do that in the past, but not in the modern era. You know, the last time you can remember, this is pre-Civil War, right? So I don't know that that's really the way forward to de-Trumpify a party. Yeah.
Sorry, yes.
Is the Robert Kennedy Jr. thing, he's still on some of the ballot papers.
Yeah.
Is that completely dissipated now, or is it still going to be a factor?
I'm sorry, you want to? No. The question was about RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being on the ballot in some of the states. He said he wanted to get himself off the ballot in the swing states so he wouldn't be a spoiler. I don't see that he is going to have much of an impact on this election, although even though these margins are pretty close, again, a lot of the people who were attracted to his campaign would not have voted anyway if he was not on the ballot. What we see in the polls is people who say that they are going to vote third party or maybe not vote at all is a larger number earlier on. But as we get closer, people recognize the threat of not voting for the candidate that is closer to them, and they come back to the party. This happens time and time again. And it doesn't even have to be the fact that you cut off a whale's head and dragged it around Massachusetts or anything. No.
You got a question?
Sorry, could you talk a little bit more about how AI and all that misinformation and disinformation has kind of evolved over time and how it's playing its part at the moment in this election?
Oh, yeah. Can I just add to that? I was going to ask something. I was going to ask about the influence of China and Russia on the elections, through technology. Yeah.
Thank you. The question about AI, misinformation, and disinformation, I have a whole other presentation on this. So I will try to keep my remarks brief about this. AI is used in political campaigns right now in the United States, generally to generate political messaging, which is then tested on potential voters, either in focus groups or it's put out into the information sphere and people look to see which gets more of the clicks. And then people bring that back in-house and try to change it up with what they know works a little bit better. The Russians have been using bot farms to create messaging, but they have found that their original messaging is better than what the bot farms are doing. They're using the AI to generate what are called synthetic accounts. You might call them fake accounts, but they're not fake accounts because they actually exist. But they are accounts on social media sites that traffic in disinformation. Disinformation designed deliberately to misinform. And what they do with that is they send that out under what look like regular accounts or look like legitimate news accounts. And we know that 95% of people who recirculate a news item have only read the headline. They have not actually read the entire article. And so you can get people to recirculate that stuff. So the whole point is to get real people to take that information, to share it with their friends, and then maybe even get the bonus of regular mass media picking it up and recirculating it through broadcast channels. And it's not that they're going to try to hack into computers and change outcomes, but they do hack into computers, and the Iranians got into Trump's campaign and released information to the Washington Post and the New York Times. They refused to publish it. It was actually opposition research on Tim Walz that they were able to find. But for the most part, the most effective way they think, the Russians and Iranians think that they can influence us is by working on our pre-existing divisions that we already have in this country. And that's why you've seen groups like, there's a group called White Feminism is Not Enough. And what this group was designed to do was demoralize African American voters in urban areas and get them just to not vote. Remember I said depressing the vote is part of the political strategy. And that happened in 2016. It was a group designed to depress African American vote. There is another group, it's a fake group that was designed by the Russians called Blacks for Trump. And they've circulated a lot of photoshopped images of that, trying to, say, well, Democrats are not for you. Look, there are Republican, or there are black people who support Trump. Maybe you should not vote Democratic. And so trying to play on our existing prejudices and divisions in the nation has been more of a focal point than actually trying to persuade people one way or another. It's just trying to sow discord in our system. And they've been pretty effective at it seems like.
Okay, two last questions, please.
Given the possibility of stalemate, how does that suggest appropriations for Ukraine in the future, whoever wins?
Yeah, I think we're probably not getting it. In fact, what Joe Biden is trying to do is he's trying to get all of the money that's going to Ukraine sent out the door by January 3rd. January 3rd is when the new Congress is seated, and they can engage in rescission of those monies if they wanted to. And so I think that we've probably seen the end, at least in the near term. Unless something tremendous happens, I don't see much more money going out the door to Ukraine. I mean, the way that they were able to get it done last time was combining it with Taiwan and Israel to get enough votes together to get it passed. I don't know if they're able to do it again. I think we've probably seen the last of the aid in the near future going to Ukraine. Unless they get really clever about it, unless President Harris pulls a FDR, right, and does a Lend-Lease sort of program like we did with the British in the 1930s. I think that is a way. There are some ways around it. Even before the appropriations bill came, there was, we're sending F-16s to places like Poland, right? And then Poland is sending their MiGs to Ukraine. So there are ways you can send the aid to a third party, and the third party then gives a different form of aid. That might be a clever way around it, but it's whoever's in power, if they're going to try to get it, it's not going to be straight cash assistance. It's going to be weaponry and aid materials, probably funneled through another source.
Okay, last question.
I was just wondering if executive counties on election night to watch to give an indication.
Oh, wow. Which counties? Okay. Remember I said probably the road to 270 leads through Pennsylvania? There's a county in Pennsylvania called Erie, Pennsylvania. The Erie County is in between Pittsburgh and Buffalo, near Niagara Falls on the west coast, on the western part of Pennsylvania. That county has voted with the winner in the last couple of elections. That's the one to really watch. Yeah.
And on that note, thank you very much, Professor. Let's give him a round of applause. Give a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming today. It's just so great to see you all here, and thank you for all your amazing questions. And I heard some of you also placed bets about who will win, so I don't know if you want to keep your options open after hearing this talk. But once again, thank you to Victoria University for this venue, and we hope you guys keep in touch with us and see what new events that we have coming up, which is nice and exciting. But we will know soon the results, hopefully. But also for those who want to ask a little bit more questions to Professor Todd, feel free to do that when we finish, which is in a minute. But yes, let's give one last applause. Thank you all for coming tonight. We hope to see you again.